Okay, we're recording. We're live. We did it.
Oh, you did it.
Yeah, I broke it and fixed it. Me and technology are not getting along today at all.
No?
No, WordPress has been a real treat for me.
Oh,
It's been a real time.
real.
Yeah, I'm just man, it brought back memories of when we first started doing PSE Breathe, like whatever that was 4 years ago,
Uh-huh.
and putting that programming in, and then doing tactical too. Oh
Yeah.
God, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. This is a beast.
Yeah.
Cool. So I reread that article today that Alex Hutchinson, is it Hutchinson or Hutchison? I remember. Hutchinson wrote in Outside.
Yeah.
So I figured that would be a good thing to chat about. Decent. It was a decent article. I kind of went into like, Wasserman died. Carl Wasserman, who's like the father of metabolic
Wasserman Gears.
Totally. Passed away this summer. And so it was just about what some of his original thoughts were, and then what we've learned about lactate and some of that stuff, but in like lactate shuttle theory, a little bit of that. But largely the article covered like what is pretty well known at this point, that it's not lactic acid, that's a molecule called lactate, and that there isn't a point where we transition to not using oxygen. And I feel like that's, at least from what I've read, and I know from what you've read too, like that's pretty well established knowledge in energy system research for like quite a long time. Like that's not really that new of information. But then the article kind of totally skipped over how the oxygen gets delivered to the system and just went into essentially like how modern scientists are defining the nomenclature for thresholds of work on a cellular level, but not really how oxygen gets delivered to those cells. And I know it's something that we talk about a lot, but I think it might be kind of fun to riff on, and like, why have we been so dorky about nasal breathing in the gear system, and how that ties into essentially everything that we're doing, this whole metabolic development piece, because I feel like there's still so much missed. It's still athletes and, to some degree, scientists are still quite focused on improving their relationship with oxygen by just doing more work. Like no matter how they're defining it, they're just still looking at like, what type of work am I doing? But they're really not looking at, they're still kind of missing the physiology.
You can't solve problems by going about things in the same way you've always gone about them. And it seems as though, and I know if like I've actually had some interactions with Alex in the past. He's a really nice guy, but there's the world is so stuck on itself in so many ways, and it's just it has to think
about the endurance world.
Well, not even the endurance. I think academia. I think science in and of itself. And I mean, this is like Bruce McEwen, who just recently died last year. He was Sapolsky's mentor. Huberman was actually attached to him. He's a neuroscientist. He was a multi-level scientist, but he advocated for getting out of these silos of this specialization of things. And it's just so interesting because I don't know. I think this is why we so grossly misunderstand things in so many ways. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just misunderstand, but we keep going at this thing like we can outwork it. That's very Western thinking.
Yeah. Instead of trying to cooperate with.
Well, this is like something like, like what's his name? I brought this up like our first conversation, but that I was listening to Alan Watts.
Yeah.
You can either row a boat or you can sail a boat. We like to row, and you can sure as shit row across that ocean, but it's going to take you a long ass time and a lot of work.
Yeah. And I mean, right there to some degree, they both have a place.
For sure.
Right. No,
yeah.
And I think it's important that, should, just practically speaking about exercise, like, should people be able to work hard? For sure. When we're talking about, developing thresholds for work, and to develop conditioning, I think, one thing I've been trying to think a lot about, and I've been thinking about this, just like I've listened to a couple talks that Elon Musk gave, a couple talks that Sam Harris and Eric Weinstein have given, and they all talk about first principles. Like if you're doing thought experiments, or you're trying to progress something, then go all the way down to first principles, right? And so when we're talking about developing conditioning, I think one of the first failures is that people don't think about what conditioning means in the first place. Like, what is conditioning? Like, when you're conditioning an organism to do something, what does that mean? And if you're conditioning an organism to do something, it means you're trying to get a predictable pattern of behavior, but less energy to get the same pattern of behavior from nature's perspective. Like, that's the whole point of the conditioning, is next time you have to do this, we want it to take less energy. Next time you have to do this, we want it to take less energy, because nature knows that the amount of energy that passes through a living organism is finite at any one time. You can only put it in so many directions at once, right? And that's what conditioning is. And if we think about conditioning in a human performance perspective, and then even narrower, like conditioning for the purpose of sport, then you're still talking about being more efficiently using energy to get towards the effective outcome. And if we're talking about that, then we have to stop always having conversations about how hard you can work, because that's capacity and not efficiency, right? And you have to have some capacity, like what's the total, how big around is the fire hose, right? But at the same time, it's like, maybe you could get a little bit more pressure out of that thing if you tightened it down a little bit. So when you skip over the entire mechanism that delivers oxygen into the system, then it leaves an enormous gap for study, which is kind of cool, right? I mean, that's kind of cool from like an R&D perspective. Like, there's a whole thing here that hasn't really been looked at, but I'm just curious about what it is that keeps driving people towards the work piece over, and like, maybe it is cultural, like you said, like, hey, maybe it's a Western thing that, like, for us, it's about like, how hard can you work, like do work, and that's the pinnacle, sort of expression, rather than like, how efficiently can you get something done.
Yeah. I in a similar vein, it's, I'm in a conversation, well, going back and forth with Nestor on something, and we there's not so the medical and scientific community are finally coming to an understanding that things like cancer, Alzheimer, type 2 diabetes, epilepsy, and, you know, the majority of every other chronic disease that we have are all metabolic issues. It's a dysfunction in the metabolic system, right? And I'm not suggesting that, you know, how we breathe is.
No, but doesn't that make sense though? Like when you say that, it's like people go, oh, of course, everything, like what you guys think is the answer to everything, but that's not the case. Like if you think about the number one behavior choice that you can do to reduce all cause mortality, it's exercise. It's exercise. And we're talking about all causes of mortality, cancer, heart disease, stroke, also mental health, depression, anxiety. Like exercise fits into every one of those categories. And why is that? Because it addresses metabolic health.
It addresses the metabolic thing. So here's where I'm going.
That's why it works.
So people are like, well, you got to go exercise. And it's like, well, here's my theory. And it's not just mine, because I'm obviously I'm pretty deep in the rabbit hole on this to some degree, right? I'm not like uber smart on all this stuff. Like a lot of people are way out there and deep on this, but you know, like, so Dr. Gabor Mate is kind of a powerhouse here in a lot of this stuff. And he's written a number of books, one on addiction that I loved, which is called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. But then I've got another one that I've been reading that's fascinating. Oxley and I have been reading it, and it's called When the Body Says No. He has been able to observe that, and this will fit right into everything, that the majority of his patients in his private practice that have suffered from every chronic disease that he has been able to see and look at, most of these people suffered from the inability to say no somewhere and somehow in their own life. Now, a lot of us are like, well, I can say no. But what he's alluding to is how we emote. Our emotional health is at the actual foundation of this stuff. And that in turn has this, like, emotion carries so much weight physiologically, and we don't look at it like that, right? Like, think about anxiety in and of itself and how much, like, bandwidth that costs, constantly thinking and constantly trying to be on, We're thinking about what could be done or what could I do, what, you know, like these are all things we've all experienced, right? What is the energy cost of that? Well, you and I know what breathing looks like as a result of that. So what's the metabolic function of that? Exactly. That would be tied into more things like anaerobic glycolysis, because of a lack of oxygen being present. So it's the constant system or cellular bombardment of something that inevitably, could it cause dysfunction? I don't know. But I know I have been able to look at some things that, do kind of lean in that direction. And it just so happens that this is where all of these dysfunctions somehow work themselves out. And it's, we got to go work, you know.
Well, and here's the thing, is like, this is kind of a funny, it just ties right in, because I know right now there are like really popular thinkers and sort of, I don't know if he's consider himself a philosopher or not, but like Robert Greene, right, who kind of downplay the importance of emotion. Like emotions become this sort of persona non grata byproduct that is bad. That like we should, you know, and you hear this a lot in some circles, like emotions are this thing that that poorly affect judgment. And I would only agree with that if it's like if it's poorly integrated emotion. But to think that nature just threw this entire portion of our brain in that is not useless, that's useless, is like kind of goes to the same, circles back to the idea of like, oh, well, this lactate stuff, this is just waste, and we need to get it out of there. And it's like, so we think we knew better than 6 million years of evolving the human, right? And it's like, no, it just means we don't understand its place yet, right? So like we check it off, and emotion's another one of those things. And when it comes to performance, like real high performers, like who are sort of integrated, will admit, right, they know how to integrate that stuff, especially if they don't want to pay a really high price later. And because I think a lot of times when we look at performance physiology, we look at the physiology during the performance only. Like, what's the physiology during the performance? And then anything else is irrelevant, right? It's that same like myopic way of looking at things, instead of like the totality of how is this person dealing with life. Because even for people who are performing high performance, or who are engaged in high performance frequently, it is not even close to the amount of time that they spend not high performing. And that's all the time when the emotions and all that unconscious stuff, right, is running their playbook in the background, sucking up valuable energy. It's like, you don't measure your car's performance only when you go 100 miles an hour, right? It's like, how does it drive around on a daily basis? Like, if it only works well if you smash the gas pedal down, it's not a very useful commuter vehicle, right? Like, it has to be
Right.
run the bandwidth. So, which is the whole point of, being an adaptable person anyway.
Yeah, man. I mean, but this is also, this is why it's like people are so fixated on strictly nutrition with these, with keto. Like, this is why there's such a fix on keto with disease. Is it's like it makes sense because it actually fixes the deficiency in what's happening metabolically, right? Like, it forces ketones, it forces more oxygen to be used, right? So this is where the change happens, when it's like, yo, that doesn't mean it's so then nutrition is the sole answer to it all. And it's like, don't think so.
No, and that's, I think I saw, was it a clip today of Rob Wolf, and he was talking about the sort of craze around fasting right now. And he was like, maybe just like have a diet with like clean protein and like enough carbs and like good micronutrient content, and like move your body around and go outside and get some sunshine. And like the research for those things together is, there's such a high preponderance of it, or you can smash yourself with fasting all the time. And he was like, why not just like eat sensibly and exercise and go outside and just do it for a really long time, and it's like, hey, that makes sense. And I think that's where, to kind of go back to your reference about Alan Watts, right? It's like that Zen thing of chop wood, carry water. It's really like it's those little daily collections of behaviors that end up adding up to the really important shit. It's like,
Dude, it's all in the story we're telling ourselves. It's just this thing we drag along through our lives.
it does take up energy, though. I mean,
yes, it does.
It
takes up a lot of energy.
You can even see it with people who, like, the way that they age, right? How people are aging, and how much stress they've had, and it's an interesting thing to watch happen.
Yeah, I mean, I just, going back to like that article on Outside, it's like trying, I don't know, it's just funny.
Well, we haven't really gotten too much into the science of it, but essentially forever, right, people thought lactate's a waste product, right? And that the whole idea is that the system wants to clear it out. And
lactate's a waste product, CO2 is a waste product.
Yeah. But nature doesn't work. Nature doesn't waste, right?
No.
It only repurposes, right? And so really what happens is that carbohydrate metabolism generates lactate, and then by combining some of that lactate back with oxygen, then we continue to be able to recycle ATP. So it essentially becomes about the continuous ability to deliver oxygen to the cell. It's just what's the totality of oxygen use on the cellular level, like for the whole organism, that kind of determines threshold. But one of the things that we missed was that the body doesn't like pH to become acidic, right? So it starts to alter behavior, right, on the level of breath, and then it starts to create these recurring patterns in breath where it's trying to dump CO2 to keep a more acutely alkaline system, but at the same time delivers less and less oxygen, right? So the longer that we're dumping that CO2, then the less and less efficient we get at delivering that oxygen. This is McCune's whole thing, right? Is that by keeping the mouth closed and using the Bohr effect to our advantage, we can actually be more tolerant of carbon dioxide in the bloodstream and then become far more efficient. The only place where I tend to stray from what he says is that he says breathe light to breathe right, that you should never be really taking deep breaths. And to that I say, dude's never been in a fight then, which I don't know how that's possible for an Irishman, but sometimes.
Well,
but
I mean, we can only speculate, but it's like, I mean, look at his pedigree. It comes from Buteyko. So that's what Buteyko's whole selling point was.
Yeah.
That's what he got hot for. And so, you know, you got to stick to your guns on what it is. Yeah.
And I have a lot of respect for him, and he totally makes sense on a lot of things, especially developing steady state aerobic capacity. But I think for anybody who's going to be exposed to intensity, they have to have some kind of heuristic in place that allows them to move in and out of those zones intelligently. But long story short, like being able to develop those pathways, that anaerobic pathway or that aerobic pathway, essentially then boils down to stopping thinking about things as waste, like not thinking about waste, but thinking about efficiency. Like, and it's funny how developing that efficiency by focusing on breath, it actually ends up making your training time reduce, because you get more of a direct potent physiological outcome. So you don't have to sit on and do these long work periods, because you're more directly affecting the actual physiological component that you're after, right? And I think that was the big piece that was missed in Hutchinson, is that it's still about work. Like it ends up still just being about work, right?
Yep.
Whatever. I mean, you essentially blew that apart in the endurance community like 10 years ago. You don't have to run long. It's not necessary.
No, but we do like to suffer because that's our identity. We're going to drag that along.
Yeah, well, and I mean, look, nobody's escaping the suffer bus, really.
No.
Well, it's like, if you know you're going to have to suffer, then smarter to
How
choose.
efficient can you be at the suffering?
Yeah, and like, what are you suffering for? Like, if you're like an amateur fun runner, like, is that really where you really want to spend that money? Or do you want to save those chips up for, like, you know, when one of your kids like breaks their legs and you have to be emotionally present in the hospital? Like, where do you want to spend those chips? You know, and I don't know, maybe people have both. I'm just you know, we're just talking, but I think it's interesting how it keeps going back to people just think they can just outwork it, like you were saying earlier. Like, we're gonna work harder, and I just don't think you can outwork nature.
It's not going to happen.
It's not gonna happen.
Hasn't happened yet.
No, you can't outwork nature. And again, like, I'm
Well,
not gonna work hard, but
no, you can work hard, but how hard do you work? Are you drinking coffee?
No, water. Too late for coffee now.
I like that amateur fun runner.
But I mean, that's what it is. I mean, that's like
It is
me.
what it is. It is what it is.
I'm going to jiu-jitsu here in a little bit, and I have no impression that I'm like some super cool guy, like in there to take on the world. Like, I'm an amateur, few days a week, go to jiu-jitsu because I like it guy. Like, I'm not training for the world championships, but some guys walk on that mat like it's all on the line, and like expend themselves every time, like it's all on the line. And I'm like, man, you're like a white belt who's like a second year guy and a second year enlisted guy in the Navy. Like, what are you getting out of this? Why are you burning yourself trying to fight with people every time you're in here? Like, I don't think you understand your practice. And that's what it ends up coming down to a lot of the times is people their practice, they don't really have a practice, they have a crutch.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what you're saying about the emotional piece.
Yes.
Right.
That's it. Bro, we're stuck in a past that we're dragging into the present, and we're terrified of our imagination of the future.
It's true.
Peter Crone. It's that fucking maniac.
Oh yeah. I remember Peter. He came to the seminar in San Diego.
Yeah. It's anyway, it's fascinating because we all do it. It's just like, I mean, I've done it. I do it.
Yeah, of course. Well, and that's the whole point. I was listening to Sam Harris talk the other day, and he was talking about like part of that's the whole point of living an examined life, and that's, you know, of course, largely inspired by, for him at least, by Buddhist and meditation practices, right? That's like analyzing one's own thought patterns and behaviors, so you can become a more conscious participant in your own evolution. And our approach to that is we sort of borrowed a bunch of tools and methods from human performance and figured out like, hey, we can use this as a practice to expose ourselves to ourselves, right? Like, and breath control is such a big part of it because, at least I think it's because it's the easiest part to democratize. Like, you don't have to be a training nut to benefit from breath work, but because it is this like physiological stronghold for everything, all three sort of portions of the brain, then it kicks you the real deal. You know, it doesn't, your breath, like your physiology is never going to lie to you about where you're at.
No. No, even running or being an endurance athlete.
Well, and that's why people get hurt, right? People get injured and go, well, why did this happen to me? I'm like, I think what you mean is, why did I choose these sets of behaviors that ultimately led to this outcome? Unless, of course, like you're running and you get hit by a car, right? But most running injuries are quote unquote overuse, right? But it's like many thousands of bad decisions.
And then it becomes the story about the car that hit me. So I can just relive that. Right?
For some, yeah.
For a lot.
The anchor that defines the way that it's like becomes their true north. And that's how they navigate. It's a hard cycle to, you know, I'm not trying to be mean about it. Like it's a difficult thing to overcome, you know.
Yeah.
But it can be done.
It's a heavy pattern.
Yeah, and again, it goes to conditioning, right? Like you're also like trauma, like on the other side of that, if you survive, right, is conditioning, because hey, that was really serious and we almost didn't make it on the other side of that. We had a really rough time adapting to that. So let's make sure we got a lot of warning signals just in case. And those warning signals can really build on top of each other in a way that's in the long term not conducive to becoming highly adaptable, right? And then to get back into the metabolics of it, the metabolics of warning signals is lactate, right? Because it mobilizes energy fast. So, just to bring this back around full circle for people who are listening, because we bounced on and off the rails of that article so much, that the thing to remember is that state mechanics physiology, those are all just lenses through which the same picture is, being seen. That the physiology of the emergency system is lactate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most certainly is. Oxygen ain't present.
Yeah. All right, sir. That's 30. Booyah. We're going to do another one of these soon.
Okay.
That's 3. Shift Perspective, episode 3.
I can see through your glasses.
Yeah.
I can see the reflection.